Good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events this afternoon, or evening if you're in the UK. Owen Matthews joins us to talk about his brand new book, Red Traitor, from the UK. And I'll go ahead, we have copies here, and I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field if you'd like to order one from us. And our friend Alma Katsu is joining us as well to do the interview with Owen this afternoon. And we do still have a handful of autographed copies of her brand new book, Red Widow. So I'll also put a link to that in the comments field. And Barbara is joining us from Santa Fe with a very nice background. And I'll be, as usual, monitoring the comments. So if you have questions for Owen or Alma or Barbara, go ahead and put them in. And I will emerge towards the end of the hour to ask any questions you might have. So in the meantime, Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Isn't this great? Zoom allows us to be in 4 different locations to have this conversation this afternoon. I absolutely love it. Oxfordshire, Owen was pointing out to me, and perhaps we can ask him again, is a place where it's a real center of literature. And you live in a village in which there are many ties to famous authors, so perhaps she'll tell us about that. But let me introduce Owen first. He's a British writer, historian, and journalist. His first book, Stalin's Children, was shortlisted for the 2008 Guardian First Book Awards, the Orwell Prize for Political Writing, and France's Prix Médicis. Or do they call it Medicis in France? I never know with the French. Did they keep the Italian?
No, Médicis. I don't know why, but it's Médicis.
I thought they'd probably dump the Italian CI thing. And his books have been translated into 28 languages. He's a former Moscow and Istanbul, my favorite city, bureau chief for Newsweek magazine. Maybe you could write a book about Istanbul one of these days.
Yeah, I will.
Wouldn't that be fun? And our interviewer today joining us is Alma Katsu, who has written a number of books with a supernatural background, Donner's Pass, the Titanic, but went back to her roots because she's so well qualified to do this today because she works as a former spy agency employee. And she wrote a terrific book, which we did a Zoom for earlier this year called Red Widow, which I hope, Alma, do tell me, is going to be the first in the series because it was really a wonderful book. There are going to be more, right?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm working on the second one right now. It's called Red London. Maybe I'll be coming over to the UK.
Oh, wow, excellent.
Wouldn't that be fun? So since I mentioned it before Alma takes over, Owen, tell us again where in the village, what are all the literary connections? Because I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, the village is called Whiteham, and it's a sort of hour's walk outside Oxford to the northwest. And there's a great wood here, Whiteham Wood, which belongs to the university in its entirety. And it's where C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien would come for walks with their little literary gang called the Inklings. And so these woods are literally the inspiration for Narnia, the inspiration for Middle-earth, Mirkwood, all of these sort of mysterious, deep, scary English forests that inspired that mid-century English fantasy literature. It's all here. And actually, it is a really spooky wood. It's like 700 acres. It's ancient, it's atmospheric, and also just around the corner is all the places from Alice in Wonderland, including actually the rabbit warren where the White Rabbit used to live. I mean, it's a real rabbit warren. It's actually mentioned in the Doomsday Book in the 11th century. The rabbits are still there, same rabbits, no white ones, but you can actually walk right by the riverside and where Lewis Carroll would take Alice Liddell on picnics and photography trips. And so this area that I live is steeped in English literary culture.
I always thought the Lewis Carroll story was slightly dodgy, but we can give a pass to C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien for sure. Yeah. But I'm fascinated with how you got from Istanbul to the village. Is it your native village? I mean, why would you? That's just an amazing place for you to settle after this international career.
Well, no, just because as a writer, I don't really have to live anywhere except that I don't want to. So I can write anywhere. Well, actually, as Alma knows, most of a writer's life is actually spent not writing, avoiding writing. trying, displacement activity of every sort. So we just chose it because it was charming, and because the kids were in school here. But actually, in a couple of weeks, we're moving to Rome. Yeah, we just decided to move to Rome because it's nicer and cheaper and warmer.
As one would. That's one of the things I love about talking to people who live in Britain and the European Union, is that they go to places that seem unimaginably far for us, right, Alma? It's just the drop of a hat. Oh, we're going to move from the village near Oxford to Rome in a couple of weeks. Okay, wonderful. Well, Alma, I'm going to hand it over to you on that note.
I have to say, that sounds like an ideal life. First of all, that's just amazing. And yeah, I'm totally jealous. Well, first, let me thank.
But it's your life too, Alma.
I'm sorry?
It's your life too, Alma. You're a writer. You can live wherever you like.
I know. So this could open up this whole conversation. I guess it has to do with, how mentally free you feel to spend money or something. I don't know. Well, first, let me thank Barbara and Poison Pen for letting me be part of this conversation today. It's always a lot of fun to be with the folks at Poison Pen, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you because I think you've just had such a fascinating life, and I think there's a million questions we're going to be able to ask you. But let me start it off by asking you, the author, to tell us, just a little bit, tell us really quickly about Red Traitor.
Well, Red Traitor is the second part of a trilogy. It's set in early 1960s Soviet Union, and my hero is a former police officer. He's recruited to the KGB, and his job is special investigations into special people, senior party members, secrets, the kind of internal investigation kind of unit of the KGB, if you like. So he's the basic tension of my hero, Alexander Vassin, that goes right from the beginning of the first book right the way through, is that he's working for this kind of incredibly dangerous, scary, terrifying, morally dubious organization. He is a patriot, actually, and that's kind of the major theme of Red Traitor, is what does it really mean to be a patriot? At what point does following orders actually come into conflict with your higher duty to actually protect your country? And largely in the recurring moral dilemma in all of the books is that Vassin is trying to protect his country from the people who claim themselves to be protecting it. So it's the classic sort of question, quis custodiet ipses custodos, is the, who guards the guardians. And the plot of Red Traitor, just as the plot of the first book, Black Sun, they're both based on historical events, extraordinary historical events, actually. And in this case, the major plot driver, the theme, is the extraordinary story of a Soviet submarine, B-59, that was one of 4 submarines that was sent into the Caribbean at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1961. And they have a terrible secret, because on board they each carry October 1962. Did I say 61? The first book is set in 61, October 61. This is set in October 62, and it's and each of these submarines carries a nuclear-armed torpedo, and each of the captains has the operational right to use that if he is attacked. Actually, I think for the first time in the history of warfare, that was the case, that like a single sort of mid-ranking naval officer had the right literally to trigger World War III. And the true life story on which the events of the book are based is an extraordinary confrontation that happens on the bridge on the command deck of B-59, where you have the captain who wants to shoot a nuclear-armed torpedo at an American warship that is pursuing him, and the commander of the flotilla, who in fact outranks him, and whether they're actually going to launch this missile. So that actual this torpedo. So that true life story became the genesis of the thriller that I built around those real life events.
So when you like heard the story, did you decide then and there that you were going to have to write a story about it, or did it sort of evolve? I mean, honestly, and what you just gave us, there's so much to unpack. I feel like we could go off in a bunch of different directions. So let me just pursue the genesis of this particular novel first, and then maybe we'll talk about your fascinating life and some other things. But so I am kind of curious. Like you said, you have this is the second book in your trilogy. The first one takes place in 61. The second one takes place in 62. Having read Red Traitor, you pack a lot of history into that 1 year. I mean, I agree. The story that you just told about the confrontation on the deck of the sub, you know, I think most writers would say, wow, that is a dynamic story and I want to write a novel about it, right? But you actually did. So, I mean, was it just the appeal of that particular scene, or was it the whole Cuban Missile Crisis? I mean, it may be unfair to say that, you know, this is a story about the Cuban Missile Crisis from the Russian point of view. I feel like that's giving your story a little bit of short shrift there. But I mean, that is such an amazing, you know, dramatic story that just begs, you know, to be novelized. So what was the genesis for you?
Well, the genesis is that, because the genesis is that my character has to be in the center of a series of major historical events. So the first one, this is the second of three. The first one is was the true story of the biggest thermonuclear device ever built. It was detonated on October 31st, 1961, and it was built in a secret city. And it was 10 days before the bomb was dropped. The inventor of the bomb, the creator of the bomb, Andrei Sakharov, future Nobel Peace Prize winner, but then in the 60s, a major player in the Soviet thermonuclear bomb world, realizes that there's a very serious possibility that the device that he's building could actually set atmospheric hydrogen on fire, and when they test it, they could actually set the Earth's atmosphere ablaze. And 10 days before, this is the true story, 10 days before they drop the bomb, he orders a radical redesign, and the casing of the bomb, which had been 22 tons of pure uranium, he swaps it out for 22 tons for an equal amount of lead, and thereby saves the world. So that was like volume one. I thought, like, great story. Like the Tsar bomb, RDS-220, the Tsar bomb, as it was described by American journalists, is volume one. The twin stories of B-59 that I just touched on, and that of the traitor Oleg Penkovsky, probably the most senior Soviet military man to spy for the West, is 1962. And the third volume, which I've just finished, in fact, last night, or in fact this morning at 4 a.m. and press send, is about the backstory of the Kennedy assassination.
Oh my goodness, that sounds fascinating. That was one of my questions. What is 1963 going to hold for us? But that's fascinating.
It's Kennedy, because Lee Harvey Oswald spent time in Minsk, as you know.
Yeah. So what's the title?
He had a Soviet wife. She's still alive.
Oh my. Oh, what's the title of that one going to be?
So it's called White Fox. I actually came up with that title at 3:30 in the morning.
Oh, wow.
This morning.
Oh. So I'm going to, Alma, let me just stick in a comment here, because since I am a generation older than you and 30 years older than Owen, you are writing and telling me stuff about things that happened in my lifetime. I was a senior in college in 1962 that I didn't know as an actual witness to that time. I mean, none of us knew the story that you have told here in Red Traitor. And I find it singularly unnerving to find that my life has turned into history, and that people are telling me things about the times I lived through that at the times I lived through them, I was totally unaware of. And I mean, I'm not a person who ever lived in a vacuum or, you know, wasn't following. I mean, I just find it fascinating that we've learned so much about World War II in the last 10 years in particular. There have been just an absolute raft of World War II stories, many of them about women and about things in the war that none of us knew about or even thought about really. And now here of a sudden, we're moving up in the scale, and you are talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it's just before the Vietnam War starts building up. So I found your book completely fascinating, and I thought, why didn't I know that? I mean, why didn't I know that then?
No, I don't think you're to
Well,
blame. I'm sorry. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
it was a secret then. Nobody knew it. It only came out after in the 1990s, when the survivors actually told the story of what had happened in those, on that fateful day in October '62. It was a secret. Nobody knew. It wasn't just you, Barbara. Don't worry.
No, I know it wasn't, but it's so interesting, because if we're thinking about making intelligent decisions at the time that events are going down, if we don't actually know what's going down, it makes it even scarier to think about making choices and decisions, where we don't have all the information that we could. Now today, perhaps the guy would have been texting from the bridge, and, we wouldn't have the same vacuum that we probably had in 1962. But
yeah,
if you joined the CIA, that wouldn't be you'd be much better informed. You just had a different career path.
That's that for Alma. I mean, that's her job, not mine.
Well, one thing I was going to say, it's a little dry, but really, since I guess it was after 9/11, the whole lessons learned thing in the military and the government picked up a lot. So I think there's more information sharing. There's quicker retrospectives on things that happen. But let's forget that and kind of go back, though, to what you said, because it reminds me of how I felt as I was reading your book, Owen. And that is, you're either the most amazing liar or a superb historian. I mean, you really picked through. Now you're going to tell me you're a great liar. But, it seems when you're reading the book that you must have just been such an exhaustive researcher. Like, I mean, I'm sure some of it you made up, right? Like how this particular ashtray where you're hiding the dead drop. Actually, you made that up, right? It doesn't actually exist. But there's so much detail in this book. It's just amazing. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your research process? Or are you like a magician and you're going to keep that hidden?
No, but Alma, I also, but it's nothing more than what you did in Red Widow. I mean, there's amazing detail in there, but I mean, that's obviously drawn from your own life. And in the same way, I mean, I obviously didn't live. I was not alive in 1961 in the Soviet Union, but 1962 in the Soviet Union. But lots of the details of the day-to-day details are. I mean, I did travel to the Soviet Union as a kid because my mother was Russian. So all this sort of the world is sort of populated by, and I spent many years of my life as Moscow bureau chief and living in Russia. So the Russianness is from personal experience. The kind of details of the sort of back and forth. I went to visit a submarine. That was the coolest thing. I took my boys. It turns out that some British guys bought a Soviet submarine after like a series of sort of very convoluted events. They bought a whole Soviet attack submarine for like £200,000 for scrap metal. And it is moored in the River Medway in England because they wanted to like turn it into a museum, but it's actually really hard to make a museum because when you actually get on board a submarine, you realize like there is literally no space. It's one of the things that's completely extraordinary. And for the most part, like, if you look at the Hunt for Red October, it's like, they're in a conference room. They're sort of, sort of rolling their chairs back and forth and like, sort of pointing to maps. No, literally it's that. It's literally that. You can put your hands on the ceiling. You can put your hands on the walls. That's the command center. It's insanely claustrophobic, and there's like a million pipes and taps and everything. I mean, it's kind of amazing that anyone survives, being at sea and all of these things. The people. So in terms of the research, that part was where I kind of understood something that was really both important, was actually super important to the plot, and actually something that I had no idea of before. And that is like a submarine, you're literally living inside a machine, with 80 of your shipmates, and there's like no space. The corridor, you can't even pass each other in the corridor. Someone has like sort of press themselves flat in the corridor for two people to pass. So that's and of course, when you add drama into that, and especially sort of extraordinary stress, you're in this metal tube, and you think, or the captain thinks, in my book, the captain thought in history, that he's being depth charged, and that suddenly these steel walls, the walls of this kind of claustrophobic steel world which you inhabit, are just about to crack, and the water's going to pour in, and you're just going to go down in 900 meters of sea, and your life is going to end within a minute and a half, because you're just going to go, you're going to go to crush depth. So that jeopardy and that human conflict in that tiny space, because they're not, it's not like they're not sort of shooting each other like Sean Connery, shooting each other like Sean Connery in The Hunt for Red October, which is, by the way, an excellent film. It's a fantastic film. It's a fantastic book. But the fact that you are having this argument with a person who's like 3 feet away from you, and like 4 feet away from you, there's another guy, and there's like 8 people in this tiny space. It's mad. It's like a sort of crowded New York metro carriage. Yeah. So anyway, so in terms of the research, that part, what I think was the most important for the drama, is that actually the idea, actually sort of getting into that submarine with these crazy guys who happen to own it.
Super well. I mean, that last, would you say it's like the last fifth of the book, you're cutting between what's going on in the sub and what's going on with another character, in another space. But that whole passage, the whole time, you just feel the claustrophobia of being in the sub. You feel like you're right up, up against the other Russian officers. It's so visceral. You did such an amazing job there. And I have to ask too, because you have them doing the operations for the sub. Did you take like a course in what happens aboard a Russian sub? It was phenomenal.
Well, no, but actually, there's this guy that happens to like own this submarine that's moored in a river outside London. It's so random. I mean, because they couldn't turn it into a museum because it's too cramped. You basically need like take out half. You need to like saw the sub in half. That's the only way to make it into a museum, because you just can't get through it. The doors are like 80 centimeters high. I mean, they're like sort of 2 feet. The hatches are 2 foot wide. I mean, it's really it's like sort of climb through. But in terms of the operational stuff, the guy who's one of the owners was like a very, very big time submarine nerd. We were in there like all day with my kids, and we had it to ourselves. It was literally just like floating in the river. It's like it's as it was. There's literally packets when it was sold by the Russian Navy to. It was sold by the Russian Navy to like the Romanian Navy or the Indonesians or something. Like, it had a really sort of weird, strange story. But there's like literally packets of cigarettes from like the early 90s, and like sort of posters and stuff, and like the sailors' boots and their coats. It's all still there. It's like a time machine. It's extraordinary. We spent all day on this thing, going like backwards and forwards, and like sort of. And these are the accumulator batteries, and these are the regulators, and these are the diesels. Like it was actually just. Spending time with somebody who is an obsessive submarine nerd.
Well, you certainly absorbed it all, and it comes through in the book. So let's move away from submarines for a minute. And you already kind of started talking about the part that really fascinates me, and that is like, how did you? It's like all paths for you led to Russia, but it makes sense now. You said your mom is Russian, and so that's how you became immersed and just grew up in the culture, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And also, I just had a very unfair advantage insofar as I grew up speaking Russian.
Yeah, your Russian must be superb.
Well, yeah, because I was bilingual always as a child, and I spent most of my career there, and my wife is Russian, so like and not having to learn Russian, as I'm sure you're aware, Russian is a fiendishly hard language. Yeah. It's a major unfair advantage.
Well, I guess that's sort of predetermined, right? I mean, you've spent your career, decades, working, spent a lot of time in Russia, running the Moscow bureau for several news outlets, but you've also been, foreign correspondent. You've covered a lot of international conflicts and that sort of thing. But it seems like now all roads have sort of taken you back to Russia now, right? You're still a commentator on on Russian politics. You've written some TV shows that are set in Russia, correct? And
Mhm.
so was it, and you started out as, in terms of your book writing career, you started out with nonfiction. So I was kind of curious, what made you decide that you wanted to turn to, fiction and a historical spy novel at that?
Well, that's a really excellent question, actually, Alma, because the thing is, I mean, I read history at university, and there's a moment when you know the bare bones of what happened. You read the memoirs, as I read the memoirs of all these people. There's a memoir by, well, it's not really a memoir, it's sort of a justification of his own actions by the spy Oleg Penkovsky, who's the fictional sort of model of the traitor in the title of Red Traitor. You read the personal accounts, but actually what you want is to get inside their heads. And it's even a memoir is not inside their heads. I mean, obviously it's filtered, it's their expression. So the Hilary Mantel is very good on this. Like, why do we need historical fiction to be true? That's such an odd construct. Why would you require that? Why should like a dragon not appear halfway through, or like why should there not be a sort of something extraordinary? Why is this very strange genre of historical fiction satisfying? And I can answer it personally for myself, and that is because the fact that the dilemmas and the decisions, whether it's a group of Soviet officers on the bridge of a submarine, or whether it's Henry VIII, and in conference with Thomas Cromwell deciding whether they're going to murder his wife, and so I mean, you realize the crucial point is, that actually happened. There were two people in a room that had that conversation. That is a fact. And there's something about that knowledge that you're populating it from your imagination. You know that it's by definition not true. It's a novel. I just made it up. It's not a history book, but nonetheless, it's all about sort of going that extra little bit to get inside the minds of those people who made those decisions that made history, literally. So that for me is actually why why it was a relatively easy step for me to go from nonfiction to fiction, because that kind of stuff, by the way, very importantly, does not belong in nonfiction. I mean, there are some writers that try and break that barrier in nonfiction, in history writing, and sort of try and make up incidents. And I always think it's like so offensive. I think it's just sort of such horse shit. It's awful when a historian tries to enliven a history book. History book is a history book. But actually, with a novel gives you that freedom. You don't have that freedom if you're a historian, but you definitely do have that freedom as a novelist. And also, you can be lyrical in a history book. You can conjure the atmosphere of sort of 1930s Shanghai brothels, and as I read a book last year, 2 years ago, about Richard Zorge, a very famous Soviet spy who spied in Tokyo and Shanghai in the 30s and 40s. There's always a temptation to sort of go further, to go inside, and I succumbed to that temptation and sort of went fictional.
It's really interesting because, I do my other books, the ones that aren't spy novels, are historical fiction, but I'm not a historian. And I do feel that historians really, if they're good writers too, can really make such an enriching story, and I certainly felt that reading your novel, that you really knew how to explore a historical event, a time, and really bring the important parts out and just make readers feel like they're there. Now, there might be one point that we disagree on, and that's just the writer in me. I kind of feel like historical fiction is kind of an expanding tent. There might have been a time where readers were expecting a certain thing when they looked at historical fiction, to be really close, to maybe put the emphasis more on the history than on the fiction part. And in that respect, I definitely put more emphasis on the fiction than the history part. I've chosen to write about two fairly well-known events, particularly the sinking of the Titanic, which has legions of fans who, know chapter and verse, and they really take offense at any tinkering with the actual history. But we're writing fiction, right? We have to make things up, even if it's just dialogue. As you said, you can't know what happened in the room when that took place.
I have a question. Were there lobsters in the kitchen of the Titanic?
Oh, we do.
And
yeah, those are the types of questions I get.
If so, it must have been a miracle.
Why do you say that?
To the lobsters in the kitchen, the sinking of the Titanic was a miracle.
Sorry, your wit is too subtle for me, I'm afraid. Or I've gotten very defensive about Titanic questions, because they do come at you like with a million questions. Well, that would have been impossible because I only had blue pens in the writing room on the second deck of the whatever. But see, I'm not that kind of person. And so, people know not to look for that kind of level of detail from my book, but in your book, yes, there is. So I was going to ask you a bunch about your views on Russia, but maybe we should skip that because I think we can come back to that. Why don't we talk a little bit more about writing historical fiction? Because, you had me so fooled when we did the article for Crime Reads. I was convinced that more of the characters in your book were actual people from history, but you said then, and correct me if I'm wrong, that no, the majority of them are fictional characters who are based on historical people, but you didn't feel like you had to, make them the actual people of actual events. Is that right, or am I misremembering?
Well, my personal rule of thumb. I mean, I'd be interested to hear what yours is, but my personal rule of thumb is like, if they're like nice people and sort of quite positive characters, and you're portraying them sort of relatively positively, or at least accurately, then you can leave the original name. You can give them like the real name of the character who they sort of play, if you like. But if they're kind of a little bit dark and a little bit twisted, and like, for instance, my hero is basically Oleg Penkovsky, but he's not. I call him Oleg Morozov. He has like his biography is pretty much the same, except I call him Oleg Morozov because Oleg Penkovsky, he lived, he died, he had, he was a hero to some people, he was a traitor to others, he had, and my job is not to sort of reconstruct or sort of make people think differently, worse or better about Oleg Penkovsky. I want them to feel about my fictional character. So basically, like if I'm sort of messing with the dials a little bit on this historical character, then I just change his name. I don't know, but how about you?
Well, I've kind of learned to change my modus operandi. So the first book, the Donner Party book, I stayed very close to the history. Most of the characters, we used the names. They were based on their, what I could find out about their lives. There was just one or two characters where I felt that I had to, even though they were still largely based on a real person, that I felt like I had to change their name. And that's because for what I needed to do in the story, I had to sort of change some aspects of their lives that I thought was like a step too far. But, and I felt terrible about the liberties that I did take with the characters. But again, I wasn't setting out really to just tell a lightly fictionalized version of what happened to the Donners. I kind of had my own theme that I wanted to get across, et cetera, et cetera. So the characters sort of had to fit, certain characters had to fit certain molds, which might have been my interpretation of that person. Again, it was always based on their actual events. And then I would just sort of project, what would a person who'd gone through these kinds of experiences, what were they likely to be like? How would they, were they nice? Were they bad? Whatever. Okay. So these are people who, I'm sorry?
Did you go on a starvation diet?
No. No, but there's certain things I probably won't eat anymore. Because, when you do a book about cannibals, I'm sorry?
Shoe leather.
Liver, for one. When you learn about cannibals, you learn all the, like what cannibals, what body parts they go for first and that sort of thing. But so here I had these people who were accused of cannibalism. And as if that wasn't bad enough, I had to make them into like alcoholics and all these other things. And, like I felt like I was abusing their names a little bit. So as the books went on, I started to come up with more and more fictional characters, again, loosely based on people who actually live, but, the names were changed and that sort of thing. So the next historical horror novel, which comes out next year, it's based on the Japanese internment, which is actually very personal to me. I'm half Japanese. My husband's family all were interned, during World War II, but it's almost all fictional characters. There's almost no characters that are based and named for real people. So the book after that will probably be 100% fictional. There you go. I'm moving over to your way, but I'm kind of curious. So what was the percentage of actual nice people in your story? 2%? Because there's only a few, right? That you actually kept.
A lot of the. No, I mean the most prominent person who actually has his own name is probably well, I don't know, the antagonist on the sub. I mean the protagonists on the submarine actually all have their own names.
Okay.
They do, because the action on the submarine is basically taken from their memoirs and their accounts. So I didn't really need to sort of mess with that part.
Right, and it just came through so great. And so I have to say too, again, you may really, maybe I'm going to be disappointed here, but it seems like, so much about Russian military, like, order of battle and equipment and all that. And of course, particularly Russian military history. So I know myself from writing historical fiction that some, people say the same thing. Oh, your books are so filled with facts and that sort of thing. But I know it involves a little sleight of hand. Sometimes you got to make things up. You kind of talked about this before, but to the extent, I mean, how much of the military part, was research but are there things that we might be surprised to find out that you actually ended up making up?
Well, I mean, the technical side, I mean, it's amazing how far you can get with Wikipedia. I can reveal. I can exclusively reveal to you, Alma, author to author. Wikipedia will get you like a long way. But the thing is, I have a question for you. Is that I was so kind of hoping that it was not a super nerdy kind of Tom Clancy type boys book. I didn't want to make it like that, but nonetheless, I am a boy, so I identify as a boy too. So I mean, I have a personal interest in like how does a submarine work? That's kind of cool, actually. But I did try and steer to somewhat clear of sort of going into sort of full Nerdville Clancy land.
No,
but,
absolutely.
But I have a question for you. Is it actually? I mean, it's kind of a big debate. Like the women are the biggest book buyers in Britain, I guess in America too. Like, are women interested in things like submarines, and nuclear weapons, and sort of spies and traitors, and this stuff, assassinations?
I'm going to speak up because actually the Poison Pen is a military fiction headquarters. I just had lunch yesterday with David Morrell, who has an interesting project on the boil with a rising star, actually an already arrived star in military fiction. Also, I know a lot more about military fiction than I might normally do. And I am an historian, so I have another question to ask you because I mean, that's my whole lifetime training. But I can say that as long as the characters are really interesting, then the submarine part and the military part will work for women. But you have to care about the people. I am not an early Tom Clancy reader, but I can read Vince Flynn and really enjoy him. I can read Brad Thor and so forth. Clancy, I thought, was more interested in technology than he was in character way back. And I think that doesn't appeal normally as much to women readers, but that's just a generalization. I don't think that there are always exceptions. I wanted to ask you, because I thought it was fascinating when your discussion about how much you could translate this to biography, because I've always felt that biography was sometimes a better way into a person's life than even an autobiography, because an autobiography has an automatic filter, i.e. the person, who lived the life and wants to present it. And I've read a lot of biographies that I have found completely fascinating. The one by Catherine the Great that came out a few years ago, for example, I thought was amazing. But how much liberty do you think a biographer will take in imagining how the character, the person at the heart of the book would be feeling or reacting? Is this, you're a Russian sort of fan. Did you read the Catherine the Great biography?
Yeah, you mean Simon Sebag Montefiore's? Yeah,
No, it wasn't Montefiore. It was an American guy. It's going to come to me, or Patrick will rescue me here in a minute because he always does. And he focused as much on her life in Germany, before she ever went to Russia.
I think I know what you. Yeah. Sorry, I think I know.
Anyway, I mean, it reads like a novel, and I thought that it had a very novelistic feeling while I read it. And to do that, he obviously had to imagine much of her emotional, state and how she would react to things. And, so I often wonder what is the truest thing that we can read decades after something happens? Is it autobiography? Is it biography? Is it nonfiction? Is it a historical novel? I mean, what is the best way to get at the truth of things?
Well, Catherine the Great is actually a great example, because Catherine the Great actually is very unusually for a person of that time, and even more unusually for a woman of that time, was an enormous correspondent and a very, very frank correspondent. So, and also her letters survive. So she's actually very upfront about, and even and her intimate letters survive, like to her lovers. And I think that's what makes her actually probably. It's hard to think of somebody else in the 18th century whose inner life still exists on paper, especially with her correspondence with Grigory Potemkin. She literally pours out her heart to this person who she considers her life partner, who was in fact her secret husband, and so on. And they are sort of like characters in Chandra de la Clos, the Dangerous Liaisons. They're like some partners in crime. They have that level of intensity and that level of passion and frankness to each other, which makes that particular woman extremely interesting, obviously, but also it gives a biographer an into their inner mind that most biographers don't have. So she's kind of the exception that proves the rule, Catherine the Great, because for instance, in my biography of Richard Zorge, I mean, he himself also wrote an enormous amount, but unlike Catherine the Great, he literally lied with every breath, with every word he spoke and every word he wrote. He was just a liar, a spectacularly successful liar. He was a very, very bad man, but a brilliant spy, because he got off on the fact that he was deceiving everybody. So how do you biographize someone whose life or lives are so sort of shrouded deliberately, professionally, and personally in mystery? And I think the answer is, I mean, that the sort of the interesting, non-obvious answer is that actually all of those things, all the versions of a person are true simultaneously. I mean, some of them are more true, some of them are not true. I mean, there is just like, there's not one person who we are. We are different people in different contexts and around different people. And all of those sort of personae exist simultaneously within ourselves. And you can also, I mean, another important factor is you can, if you're writing screenplays, the trick of a screenplay is you demonstrate character through action. But as a biography, you're doing the opposite. You're trying to extrapolate character from action. So the things people do tend to be very revealing of the reasons why they do them. I mean, there's significant clues in there. So as to the novelistic aspect, I mean, biography is so popular because, of course, we love to work out what made a person tick, and that's why, in fact, biography is very often more interesting, as you say, than autobiography. And the genre of sort of trying to get into someone's mind and discover their life. I mean, the impulse that you pick up a biography, you want to know about a person's life. It's actually very similar. It's the closest of all nonfiction to the impulse of the reader's impulse to pick up a novel.
Well, if you're interested in the great man or great woman theory of history, then getting to know this great man or great woman is obviously important. It's Robert Massey's book. Patrick, once again, has saved me. It was Robert Massey, and I read it, curiously enough, while my husband and I were on our way to spend a week as friends of the Hermitage in St. Petersburg and spend a week. And so because, we start out with Peter the Great, but really at the Hermitage, it's Catherine. And so we were immersed in a Russian idea of Catherine while we were spending a week. I chose December because we had been to St. Petersburg in July, and I was a Russian minor at Stanford, so I wanted to go and do the whole thing. And I said to Rob, we're going to go in December, because that was our other choice. And, we're going to feel like we're really more in Russia, the whole 9 yards. But I thought that you can't really escape Catherine. You can't escape Peter, either one of them. If you're spending in next century, nobody will be able to escape Vladimir Putin if you're in St. Petersburg. They're just woven into the fabric of the city.
He's going to sink without trace. He has no personality. He's a man without qualities.
Well,
you've been reading Daniel Silva. If you read The Cellist, which came out last week, I think it's absolutely fascinating, his view of Putin and the 20 years that he's been playing America, but that's a whole different conversation, so we won't go there. I'm sorry, Alma, I just couldn't resist the biography question, because that's one I've thought about on and off for years.
It's fascinating. And I have to say, when you ask the question, so this is the intelligence analyst in me, I would have to say, I don't think you could know anything from just one book. Because everything is it's a filter. It would be filtered through the author's perspective, that sort of thing. As an intelligence analyst, you end up sort of ingesting everything in order to try to extrapolate what you think is the truth, right? So, but I don't think everybody has the time to do that on every subject that they're interested in. So I don't want to go any, I know we're running out of time, and we're probably
we're fine. It doesn't matter how long we take. Just carry on.
Oh, okay. Well, there's probably some questions and answers people want us to get to, but I did have one more question for you that I'm just wondering if you would ever consider tackling a contemporary spy novel to step away from the historical aspect, because I do get the sense in your writing and also listening to you speak, and I guess it's because, you've been studying or immersed in Russian culture for your entire life, that you really understand that whole moral dilemma that people in the intelligence business face. And I think it's, because in the business, you're always sort of dealing with, is someone trying to fool you? What is the truth, et cetera, which, and this may be me sort of generalizing on Russians, but, because propaganda is so sort of, the whole Russian culture, the propaganda is sort of a big part of it. And for so much of their recent history, the people who've lived there have had to deal with this, that maybe that also gives you it just gives you a knack or a sense of, what intelligence people have to go through all the time. So would you ever consider a contemporary spy novel, or no, that holds no interest for you?
No, that's a really interesting question. It would require, I think it would actually be very hard for a really simple reason. And that is because, I've known lots of spies. In fact, last night I had dinner with somebody who's one of the people who runs MI6, and they're actually not that interesting. I'm sure the spies, maybe the spies that Alma, are much more interesting than the spies that I know. The spies that I know, they're kind of sort of charming, but frankly, they're kind of a species of diplomat, I guess. They're sort of analysts. They're smart guys, but they're definitely not James Bond. And I guess Russia still has some cool spies. They're spectacularly incompetent. But the whole Salisbury poisoning. They're just it's like the Keystone Cops. They're just but at least they do sort of cool James Bondy type stuff, poison people and sort of blow up Czech arms depots and stuff. That's at least they're sort of men of action, even though they're idiots. But and they get caught always. Well done. And but so the leap is actually, for some reason, that historical distance of a couple of generations to the early 60s, you can kind of imagine that it's more exciting, because you're in the fictional world. But and I've seen them everywhere. Like I've worked I spent a lot of time in Iraq and a lot of time in Afghanistan and Eastern Ukraine, and Lebanon and Syria and all these places that I spent my life. Various sort of hellholes that George Bush was bombing mostly. But when you kind of see it very closely, ironically, you would think that that's actually a way in, because you can easily populate that sort of your fictional story with some exciting characters, but actually it's harder because it's sort of, you need to sort of tear yourself away, which actually leads me to a question. I mean, your Red Widow, I think, was actually brilliant, because it was so for me, the most compelling thing about Red Widow is that, firstly, it was extremely convincing, and all the characters were convincing, and you care about them. But also, it's kind of it's a psychological thriller. There's no James Bond stuff in there. There's no explosions. You totally resisted that, and just sort of kept it very tight, and sort of Smiley's People type thing. It's a mole hunt. It's a classic, and it's you resisted the temptation to sort of thrillerize it, which I thought was fantastic. Actually, it was actually much more thrilling because it didn't have that sort of obvious thrillery sort of bells and whistles. The psychology of it was the compelling part.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I had a definite reason why I wanted to write a spy novel, and that was to write something with female leads. And, that dictated a certain thing, but also to kind of show that there's a lot more to the profession that people may not be aware of on the outside, especially when most of what they know about the life of spies is based on, these very, action movies and that sort of thing, which go a certain way. But as you were speaking, it kind of, and about, like your experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan and that sort of thing, it kind of made me think you were probably more exposed to the military ops guys maybe than the more traditional. I mean, there's certainly been, a move towards that since 9/11. We've moved, when people think of intelligence operations, there's been a lot more military flavored, that sort of thing. And you see a lot of books and movies along those lines, but there's still your classic spies out there. And I think you would write a darn good classic spy story if you just decided to, juice up some of your MI6 guys. They're just giving you a show when they pretend to be the little gray man that's so boring. They've done some really interesting things. They're just trying to keep you from discovering them. So think about that. Maybe that'll be what you do down the road a little bit. Why don't we see if Patrick has some questions for us?
We can do that. Let's summon him back up. This is the Shakespeare moment when we call him up from wherever he is, like Caliban or Ariel. We've had a discussion which one he is.
So what do you think?
And there he is. Who are you today, Patrick, Ariel or Caliban?
Definitely more Caliban. Yeah. They're a surprisingly quiet bunch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question which relates to the same thing Alma was just asking you, Owen, which is it, if you were writing a spy novel, is it easier to write about something where you know how it's come out than if you, for example, are Daniel Silva trying to chase, as he just has done to a larger extent than any of his other books, the very moment?
You mean, is it easier to set it in a historical moment where you know who won in the end?
Well, not so much who won, but just you sort of know how the events came out, regardless of who won. That's not really the question as much as, making sense out of it, because it's hard to make sense out of it if the events are moving right along as your book is finishing and the events are actually still transpiring. Then you're trying to catch something that's like Quicksilver, and you can't really do that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the additional there's actually, it just occurred to me, of course, that there's an additional safety layer, or sort of the fiction works better if you set it in a conflict that is now non-extant. So it's in a bubble. It's in history. It's gone. Like communism, capitalism. That whole Cold War world. I mean, it's obviously recognizable, and it's and it's relatively close, and lots of people that are still alive that fought that war, but it's a past war. So if you actually said the challenge, actually sort of looping back also to Alma's earlier question, is that the challenge of setting something like, say, in the War on Terror, or the ongoing, it's not really a war, but I mean the sort of the attempt of Russia to interfere and sort of meddle and just generally be a sort of equal opportunities disruptor that's going on right now is much more raw, or rather, even if you don't care who you upset, the issue is, what do you, you're taking a point of view.
Right.
Your story has to have a storyline. Therefore, you're sort of, and you might be wrong. And since you're building it on sort of new facts. So, for instance, if I was like sort of writing a novel about, the troll factory, let's say, for the sake of argument, you have a young Russian hacker who is recruited by the CIA to join Evgeny Prigozhin's troll factory in St. Petersburg on Rождественская улица number 10, and get inside the operation to get Trump elected. I mean, that could work, but that might be a good story, and I think almost certainly in fact happened. I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that actually there is that guy. I mean, we don't know who he is or she, but but you're actually fictionalizing things that are sort of very people get upset about this stuff if it's about contemporary affairs. They care, like you were wrong. Basically, I think it's a very simple formula. Is the historical fiction actually needs to have a degree of separation. That's why I write about the Cold War. So it's a recognizable world that I can write about, and and it's not the world of the court of Alexander of Ivan the Terrible, which is much harder to write about, although it's contemporaneous with Hilary Mantel, of course. But writing about sort of modern stories actually pisses people off, I think.
And the other problem too is they do care, but sometimes you also, at least the perception of the publishing industry at the time might be that people are exhausted by a current event, right? That they don't want to deal with it anymore. They don't want to hear about it anymore. And so even though it could be a fascinating story, it just might not be the right time for that story. That happens sometimes. And then the other challenge, at least maybe not so much for you, I think the Cold War is sort of in that sweet spot where people feel like they know something, but they're still eager to learn more, learn those details. But when you write about something that's super well known, like the Titanic, and of course, everybody knows how that one ends, you're not going to magically spirit the ship away and well, I guess you could, but that would be very unsatisfying. Is how do you get people to still read the book because they think they already know the ending? They think they already know the story. So no matter how you slice it, really, and Barbara, you should know this better than anyone. It's not easy convincing people to pick up a book sometimes.
Well, no, it's not, but I'm coming back to my comment I made earlier that Owen has revealed to me an aspect of an event in my life that I lived through. But if you had been telling me this story in 1963 or something, Owen, I don't know that it would have had anywhere near the same impact on me. And, I think it's hard to write about something happening right now because most people don't know enough about what's happening right now. Or they're too prejudiced or they're too caught up in it. This has come up, Patrick can speak to this because we ask everybody, most of the time, somebody asks a question about, are you going to write about the pandemic, right? It comes up time after time and most authors are saying no, because it's exhausting or we don't want to pursue it or we don't know how it's going to come out. So anything we say could become, irrelevant or untrue or boring. Or
Albert Camus already did it. I mean, I think Albert Camus already nailed it
in L'Étranger.
No, in La Peste.
Oh, right. Okay.
It's not about a pandemic. It's about the plague.
Right.
It's I mean, he completely nails it. Like for everything, like from the paranoia to the political sort of there's for the fact that the political parties take different positions on the pandemic, to the fact that like people get incredibly paranoid and start sort of denouncing each other. I mean, it's all panic buying. You know, what we haven't had, because actually the pandemic didn't actually kill many people. I mean, on the world scale of things, but anyway, in Britain, mortality is actually sort of more or less, you know, within the averages, within like 3 or 4%. But anyway, the point is that we haven't had the sort of extreme medieval style reaction, and that of sort of mendicant, scary, you know, religiosity, and you know, when things get really deadly and scary, and people. The morbid religiosity sort of coming in, like in sort of medieval Florence or something. Or so
well, maybe a better example would actually be, because they have Washington Post yesterday had a fabulous summary of all the defenses being put forth for the people who were caught up in the January 6th attack at the Capitol. And some of them, I don't know if you read it, but some of the defense lawyer briefs on these people, it's just extraordinary. You know, as to why they were there, or, you know, I love the woman who said, we weren't there to steal, we weren't there to destroy anything, we were just there to overthrow the government. Like, that was okay, you know, that was, I could hardly believe it. I really recommend anybody watching that, look up the Washington Post summary of the various defenses being put forth, and what of them is true, you know, and it's almost impossible to sort that out right now. It's going to be years before there's any sort of cohesive understanding or theory, if ever there can be, for something as chaotic as that. I mean, my position is it was sedition, and I don't care what their, you know, what their rationale was. It still was sedition.
I agree.
You know, but I find it creative and fascinating how these people went on. Before we close, I did want to say one thing for anybody watching this. And I don't know if it's still there, but I grew up in Chicago, and years ago, the Museum of Science and Industry was able to take a submarine, it was a Nazi submarine, down the St. Lawrence, through the Great Lakes, and put it up in front of the museum, and then they gave us tours. And I can remember as a teenager, you only could go one by one, to Owen's point that, you know, a submarine is like that big. But I can remember walking through it, and we were all having heart attacks. We were so claustrophobic, you know, just walking through it. And it wasn't even in the water. It was, you know, right there in front of the museum. And we all marveled and wondered how people even stayed sane inside that submarine, if you consider, you know, all the smallness of it, the scariness of it, the water around you, you know, all the rest of it. It takes a terrific personality adjustment or analysis or something to get people who go in that submarine and don't go berserk and hack everybody to death and blow up the submarine. So, you know, I thought you did a great job, Owen, with the people on the submarine, you know, who, I mean, a huge amount of it is just surviving being on the submarine.
And, you know, to your earlier point, I do want to assure readers, maybe particularly female readers, it's not like this, you know, techno blitz or whatever. It's a great story. I think, you know, I've found a lot of women readers that are really drawn to well done historical stories, right? And for that, they're going to really enjoy the story, because it's really going to transport you there to that time. You're going to feel like you're in Russia and you're living through these events. So don't worry about the submarine part, although it was super atmospheric the way you wrote it.
No, it really was. This has been such a pleasure, Owen. So spasiba.
Thank you very much, пожалуйста. Спасибо.
Добрый вечер and all that good stuff. Right. And I wish you much luck on your move to Rome. And maybe you're going to write us a killer Italian spy story.
There you go.
Yeah, it would kind of have to be a comedy then.
Excellent point. No, that would be good. Anyway, it's been great. Alma, thank you so much for stepping up and doing this conversation with us. And Patrick, as always, thank you. Did I walk over a potential question?
There is one question that has come in from our friend Tori Eldridge.
Oh, good.
And she has a question for Owen. Let's see here. What skills have you developed as a journalist and reporter that have benefited you as a novelist? Did you run into any challenges when you switched from writing nonfiction books to novels?
No, I mean, famously, I mean, lots of novelists have been journalists. I mean, Mark Twain and Charles Dickens. I mean, it's a well-trodden path. There's a really simple answer, and that is that everybody has a story that is not necessarily what they think is the most interesting thing about them. Everyone always has like some weirdness, which and the most interesting weirdness is the weirdness that they don't consider to be weird. So and that's the whole point about being a reporter is, you just talk to people and you get you try and dig up, a sense of who they are. So it's the telling detail actually. And that's the whole point about writing journalism and especially as a foreign correspondent, because as a foreign correspondent, you're sort of generally doing a sort of bigger picture thing about issues that the readers don't necessarily know very much. So it's all about the, teasing out that sort of little quirk, the event, the personality trait and so on that actually evokes someone's character much better. Because of course, as novelists, we're always trying to show, not tell. So you're trying to sort of, so journalism sort of gives you that skill of sort of picking up on the little sort of granular details, how somebody lights their cigarette, or how they walk through a door, or how the look on their face when they sort of walk into into a grand cafe, have they come home, have they come into hostile environment, all this little tiny little bits and pieces that actually populate character and actually make you and actually help you to create atmosphere and build tension and populate characters with sort of intention and give them depth. So I mean that's what you're trying to do as a journalist as well, is sort of eye for detail.
I have a quick question for both of you, actually. Are there any writers that are writing in your field, in the espionage, field, that you go back to for inspiration? Are you Graham Greene, Le Carre? Question for both of you.
Well, I'm a Le Carre fan, big Le Carre fan, but there's very good writers working today. Charles Cumming, I really enjoy his work. He's very good. Yeah.
I had a fantastic drunken evening with Charles Cumming last week. He's fantastic, and he's just actually very flatteringly asked me to go through the manuscript of his latest book, Judas 62, just sort of for sort of verisimilitude and sort of Soviet stuff, and I enjoyed it tremendously. So it's actually just in galleys, but his Judas 88 is out now, and Judas 62 is and so yeah, so Cumming is actually one of the best young writers, and he has that sort of dry English sensibility. I mean, there's the sort of the Carre like. And but I don't know who should we be reading from the American side, apart from Alma Katsu, obviously.
Matthew Quirk. I think Matthew Quirk writes really very, very well. And if you like Alma's books, you'd like Matthew, because he has a somewhat similar sensibility, I think. Maybe not the 500, but what was, I can't remember, his most recent 2 books I thought were absolutely terrific. So I could definitely recommend him. Mick Herron is come on strong from the UK. I'm sure you've read into him, but his is eccentric. He has a different spin on the spy story than, say, John le Carre. We're getting one more book from John le Carre. Isn't that fabulous? I mean, I think it's wonderful. It's coming out this fall, and I have no idea. I haven't seen a galley of it yet, but who knew?
Sure. Take whatever we can get.
Who would you recommend, Alma?
Oh, well, I should probably give a plug out to some of the other former CIA folks who have books coming out. Karen Cleveland's next book is coming out, I think, in August. You Can Run. She's returning back to a CIA-based character. And then there's David McCloskey, who's also a former analyst. His first novel is coming out, Damascus Station, and I think it's coming out in October. And he was a Syrian expert for CIA. And so, as you can imagine, the book is incredibly, detailed and very, very true to life. And I have to say, had so many operational details in it, I am surprised it made it through pre-publication review. Now the bar has been set higher. I can only thank him. We can get more.
And
Excellent point. Right. It
and
is
Festerman's
hard if
great,
you
too.
actually work for the CIA. If you never work for the CIA, you can make up anything you want or interview anybody you want and put real stuff into it. But if you work there, you have to go through the whole process, which is, oh Lord. It's also true for people who write military fiction, you know, from like Jack Carr will tell you about what they did to him in his most recent Navy SEAL book. You know, it takes forever to get approval. So
Well, on Red Widow, I did kind of skirt it sort of wide, so afraid, because, you know, it's kind of a pendulum. Sometimes they redline every little thing.
yeah.
And then, like, I didn't get one thing that they asked to change in Red Widow. So I know I went a little wide of the mark. So I'm going to start trying to go a little closer to the truth. With the
It was
next
more fiction than fact, was it? Is that
Yeah.
the message we get there? Anyway, this has been wonderful. It's been a lot of fun. There will be a podcast available probably tomorrow. I will send you the links so that you can publicize them. And the video will stay up on our Facebook video page forever. So you can also direct people to those. So I will send you all the links to those tomorrow. And I would encourage you to order a copy of Red Traitor from any bookstore that you like. And from us, Red Widow, because we still have autographed copies, so I'm not sharing the wealth. Anyway, it's really been a pleasure. So thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. Good evening.
Thank you so much, guys. Goodbye.
Hey.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.